Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Foundation for Common Lands webinar, the first of our sort of autumn series. And this is on landscape scale delivery on common land, learning from recent landscape recovery schemes. We're absolutely delighted to have a stellar cast of guest speakers this evening. And just before we get going, I'd like to just make sure that everybody knows their way around the Zoom webinar. So we have the chat. So please do introduce yourselves on the chat. It'd be lovely to know who's on the webinar, where you've come from, and what your interest is. So that's the chat button at the bottom. We're also going to have a session for questions and answers where you can ask questions to the panel. So if you can please put your questions in the Q&A session. So if you do that, that will be at the bottom as well. You can put your questions and answers in there. So that's a great opportunity. And then you have the opportunity to upvote. So if you like someone else's question and you think we ought to give it more priority, you can upvote there. So this evening we've got, I'm going to just quickly, we'll go through the running order here. So we're going to start after a quick poll. I mean, maybe you'd like to start the poll now, Lindsay, so that that can get going while I'm just going through this. Just to know, so we know where we've come from. And we're going to then have a policy update from Sam Burford. So Sam is the Defra's team leader in landscape recovery. So it's fantastic he's been able to join us this evening. Where they're going to move on to two very exciting landscape recovery schemes that are one's in implementation. So one's in their development phase, and the other is waiting for project assurance to go through. They've already submitted to Defra. So Central Dartmoor Landscape Recovery is still in development phase, and the Resilient Glenderamakin project has submitted to Defra and is waiting to go through assurance. And then after that, I'm going to do an update on landscape, so on governance structures for landscape recovery. And then we thought it'd be a really good opportunity to learn from those who've been collaborating for many years now. And we'll have a conversation between Megan Locke from the Martin Down Supercluster and Lindsay Stride. And Lindsay's our training and knowledge exchange coordinator. And then we will finish with a panel discussion where we'll be able to answer your questions and answers. So that's just a reminder. Please do put your questions in the Q&A and have introduce yourselves in the chat. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat for that. And we've got several people on the tech team behind the scenes who will be able to assist you with that. But it's really important you type in. We're not able to hear you, so please make sure you type into the chat. Great. So we've got quite a lot of people who've already filled in the poll. Who's here? We've got 32% of the people attending are farmers. We've got 27% are commoners, people perhaps identifying both as a farmer and a commoner. And we have 19% from environmental NGOs, 14% from farm advisors. So we're getting a real feel for a range of people who've joined the call, and that's exactly what we would like. So there we go. It's people can see the poll there and see who's come through. So thank you very much for participating in that. And we will now move on. Lindsay, was there anything you wanted to add at this stage? Don't think so. I think we're all
that's fine now. I think we're good. I think we can move on now to Sam, who's going to give us a policy update.
Great. So if Sam, you can put on your video and unmute, then that would be great. Thank you very much. all over to you, and I will stop sharing these slides so you can share yours.
No problem. Thank you, Julia. Evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me along. I'll just try not to make a fool out of myself and get these slides up before I crack on. Can we see those? Is that coming up all right? Someone
Yes,
might have to
that's
say
great.
something. Great.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can see that.
Perfect. Thank you. So hi, everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Sam Burford. As Julia mentioned, I'm one of the policy leads on landscape recovery. And I've been in there for a good while. So I've been there for about 4.5 years now, seeing the scheme largely from inception and now into delivery. The team has expanded in that time massively, as has the scheme itself. I also live on an upland farm in the Peak District, so I have a bit of an understanding of farming issues as well, and I'm also keen on environmental issues too. So I would love to be able to give you a really exciting update this evening, but unfortunately, it's a little bit dry. But I've only done a few slides. I'll try and cover as much as I can, and I'm happy to take questions later on in the Q&A session as well. So just quickly, I was asked to outline a little bit about the scheme process largely, but firstly, just in case anyone here isn't aware of landscape recovery and what it is, it's one of the 3 environmental land management schemes, the other 2 being SFI and Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier. It was essentially the kind of the newest one, I suppose, in terms of there wasn't really anything similar beforehand. And the distinguishing features that, these are what we call the distinguishing features. I think there are quite a few really, but we're looking for large scale projects, and essentially in most cases that means collaboration across a large area. So round 2 was 500 plus hectares. Round 1 the same, but that had a cap, and I'll come back to that later. We're looking for long-term agreements, so we're offering 20 to 30-year funding agreements once projects get into implementation. And we're hoping that these will help the scheme deliver things that previous schemes have failed to deliver. And then bespoke agreements. Now, obviously, not every single element of an agreement can be bespoke, but we try to make these agreements as bespoke as possible within reason. So, and they're certainly the most bespoke available in the environmental land management schemes. And we're hoping that these bespoke agreements will be able to target, what is needed in a specific area, and deliver the right things in the right place, and ultimately maximize value for money, which is in everyone's interest, given that it's public money we're looking at. And then on the funding front, we're also hoping that we can help facilitate projects accessing private funding. So typically larger projects are more attractive to investors, and private sources of private finance are often looking to deliver multiple outcomes across a large area. So we're hoping that landscape recovery can help unlock some of those markets through those other 3 elements: the bespoke, long-term, and large-scale agreements. So I think another important element that I've just put in here is that the collaboration, as I touched upon, is really important, but what we want to see is projects that are designed and delivered in collaboration with the participants and the local community. So rather than having a project imposed on an area, we'd like to see really bottom-up projects coming through into landscape recovery. There has been a perception that the scheme's all about land use change. That's not the case. Round 1 was a little bit more focused on land use change. But projects are all different. They're all involving different elements of land use change, land management change, continuation of good management in some cases, and quantifying that split isn't yet possible, but is something we will reflect upon once we have the data. So in terms of the process, we've got a competitive front end. and the application phase was, for both rounds, was indeed competitive. We got more applications than we expected, and that was a good thing. The government at the time decided to take on more than we initially aimed to do, because we got so many good applications and they were supportive of the scheme. And that's something I'll come back to later in terms of number of projects currently in the scheme and how that's going. Once they've got through that application phase, which is likely to remain competitive for future rounds, because we know there's quite a lot of appetite out there, they then enter this 2-year grant-funded project development phase, or the PDP as we call it, because we like our acronyms in the civil service. So essentially in that phase, projects develop their plans. Baselining the project area is a really important element. They're forecasting essentially what they are going to deliver and where, and looking for opportunities for private investment and other sources of funding. So what is crucial, as I said, is that the project is right for the area. And that's all, through engagement and other elements of the PDP. That's what we want that phase to be used for, to make sure that the right thing is happening. And then at the end of the PDP, you get to this, the next phase, which Resilient Glenderamakin are now in, where they submit their 6 deliverables. So there's essentially 6 plans that we call deliverables that they submit to Natural England and the Environment Agency and Defra, and Forestry Commission and others, who all look in at their specialist area. So we're looking at the environmental elements, affordability, governance, considering legal elements, etc. And then essentially what happens is we ask the project some clarifications if any elements of their deliverables are unclear, to give them an opportunity to answer. And then we go to an internal board, which essentially decides whether we proceed with negotiations with the project to try and minimize the risks to the public investment, essentially, and maximize the value for money. Those are our main objectives in negotiations. We're not trying to screw projects down to the cheapest possible project, but we need to make sure that public money is being spent effectively. What if we can agree a suitable offer or a suitable funding arrangement, and any other requirements that initial board ask us to secure or agree with the project? That sounded ominous, but I just mean like little bits and bobs of sort of, we'll do this by year 2, etc. Then projects are essentially offered an implementation agreement, or a PIA, and then they go into the PIP, the project implementation phase, and Natural England will take over from that point onwards in terms of being the grants and grant manager. And the project, who will, in the project development phase, will have had a project liaison officer who works with the project. They will then be allocated a grant manager through Natural England who'll help them through that phase. So just a quick overview of the projects that are currently in the scheme and the 2 rounds that we have so far. So the blue circles are the round 1 projects, and the green circles are the round 2 projects. Round 1 was, as I said, it was a little bit more focused on land use change because of the focus of the round, which was essentially species recovery and river restoration. We had 22 projects in that round, and then that was also launched prior to the EIP targets being very easy to use, let's say, from our side. They weren't fully developed, although they did exist. For round 2, we had a little bit more clarity on how much we needed to deliver and which schemes were going to do what. And so, and also where landscape scale action was likely to be most effective. So we designed round 2 on that basis, and it was focused on net zero, which is essentially kind of peatland restoration, woodland creation, also any carbon gains through other management, and then biodiversity, which is basically improving protected sites and creating wildlife-rich habitat outside protected sites. And we also introduced more of a focus on sustainable food production, albeit that there are some round one projects that do still involve good elements of regenerative farming and other farming. So the 34 projects went into round two, and they're delivering a variety of outcomes and hopefully will help us make a big impact towards some of those targets that we have as government. Round three, as I said, I would like to be making an exciting announcement on round three, but unfortunately we're just not in that place yet. We you know, I can give some idea of what we're thinking in terms of changes for round three, but the exact focus will ultimately be a ministerial decision. Size wise, you know, we're probably looking at similar to sort of what we've done for round two, but we may need to stagger them to manage our resource internally and maybe do something more frequent. As I said, round two was based on targets. Those targets still exist. We're not going to deliver all those targets through round two. So those broad areas are probably quite sensible things to consider when looking at round three. Water may also be, you know, water quality, which isn't very explicit in those, may also be something that comes in, and kind of natural flood management, because that's the sorts of things that we've found that the projects across round one and two seem to be well set to deliver, well placed rather. So round one, where are we and what have we learned so far? So we've got 2 projects into implementation, as you may have seen from the blog. Aware that probably seems like slow progress. I think what we've realized is that assurance is quite a big lift for us. So there are a few bottlenecks internally that I'll come back to in a moment. And you know, we're just finding our feet in terms of how we can deliver the back end of the development phase. We're hoping that another 3 to 5 projects will sign in the coming months. We've got plenty of projects. I say 14 plus there because there seems to be a new one in almost every day over the last few months. So that we have got a little bit of a backlog, but generally speaking, once we've kind of got ourselves moving, particularly past Christmas, we think that this round one is currently manageable within our resourcing. Round two are going to then submit in December and February. The bulk between December and February, the majority of projects will submit the deliverables. That is really going to put a strain on us, and we are aware of that, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to manage that. Unfortunately, it's just something that's, I wouldn't say crept up on us, but as I said, you know, we just didn't realize how much work was involved in assurance until we tried it. And now we know, and we will play that learning into future rounds. So just a quick look at the changes between rounds 1 and 2, both of which were sort of pilots for the scheme. And you know, we looked around everywhere to find inspiration for the design of this scheme, and frankly there weren't that many precedents. So with some of these things we were really just testing what would happen and whether things would work. So it was really just theories that we sort of tested through market engagement, but really we wouldn't know whether they'd work until we tried them. So from round 1 to round 2, a few of the clear changes we made. We introduced a budget cap for the PDP funding. That was to just avoid creeping costs in the PDP, which were not only difficult to manage budget-wise, but also just you know, difficult to ensure we were definitely spending public money effectively. Because you know, the projects were coming up for very good reasons to increase PDP, but obviously it can't PDP funding, but we can't just increase them infinitely. we also wanted to test our theory for round one, which is that if we had a cap, everyone would bid for it, which they did, to be fair. So we thought it may also constrain project size a little bit. And so when we removed the hectareage cap, which was something I was very keen to do, and I still believe in, we were worried about getting lots of very big projects that would absorb all the budget. Now, it wasn't particularly effective in doing that, and I think probably that part of that is because we weren't as clear as we would like to have been about what is required in the PDP, and that's something we've learned from, and we'll do better in future. Another limitation of that cap on the PDP funding is obviously with big projects, they have a lot of work to do over the area. So a lot of baselining, a lot of engagement on the complicated projects. So, that cap could disadvantage some of those larger projects. And that's something we're conscious of and something we need to try and address in future, whilst also managing budget effectively. We removed the hectareage cap, as I said. Round one cap was having unintended consequences. So we had a few projects that kind of split up and applied separately just so they could get in under the cap, which is obviously not ideal. It probably would have been more effective to have those as single projects. And also there was quite a lot of evidence and also feedback that it was disadvantaging large upland projects and also commons that can be quite large, and potentially excluding those areas from the scheme, which is not what we wanted to do. So we removed the cap, but the implication of that on our side that we need to figure out how we're going to work with is that it made budget planning more difficult, because first of all, we didn't know how big the projects were going to be that came in. And secondly, on an ongoing basis, we've sort of built in assumptions that some projects will fall out of the scheme. It's a competitive scheme and it's not for everyone, but obviously different size projects falling out makes it very difficult to forecast. But that's just something we need to figure out how we can manage internally. So larger projects have also reported some issues collecting data to meet our baseline requirements. As I said, that was some of that was on us because we didn't publish those requirements until quite late. So hopefully something that will be, won't be such an issue in future. And we also don't know whether it is an issue yet, because obviously the round two projects haven't submitted their deliverables for the most part. And so we don't know whether some of them could come in with really good baselines. Periodic reviews is something we're also looking at. We brought in for round two at 12 and 18 months. We'll probably put a 6-month one in for further rounds as well. And that's just to check in with the projects and then provide support where necessary. It's also hope that we can take a bit of the pressure off assurance by making sure that they're all moving in the right direction and have done the right things at the right points. There were gateways in the original design that were intended to do similar, but they were sort of changed in their function. There's also an adding land kind of limit or deadline, let's say, not limit. We allowed it up until 12 months in round one. We found that quite a lot of projects were focusing on expanding rather than doing their deliverables. It also increased that budget uncertainty, which was really difficult for us to manage internally, because obviously if projects are adding large areas, that's going to increase costs and we need to be able to manage that. So we reduced it to 6-month deadline in round two, and that seemed to work quite well. We haven't closed the doors to adding land in the implementation phase. There's still facility for that in the implementation agreements, but obviously decisions on whether or not that's the right thing to do will be taken in future years and potentially under different governments. So we just can't commit to whether that's going to be how easy that's going to be, essentially. And then another element that was a good improvement was that we required projects to give us GIS files, so shape files of their project area, and also standardized land manager support forms at the application phase. And that was because, and I've experienced this firsthand in round one. It was very difficult to assess land manager support. All projects approached it differently. Some of them were really good and clear, others very difficult. We got all sorts come through, from scanned deeds to everything else. So we just tried to standardize it in round two, and it seemed to work really well. I think we can improve it further. One thing we didn't include was, although we had all the land managers' details, we couldn't use those to engage with land managers directly, which is something we'd like to do at some of the review points, just to make sure that, you know, people aren't being forced into these schemes and that they're happy with how they're being engaged, etc. So again, something we can look to improve for future rounds. And then final slide, just kind of wider lessons that are less specific to rounds 1 and 2, or the difference between round 1 and 2 rather. Assurance, as I said, is effective in terms of, you know, we've been able to really rigorously assess these projects, which I think, you know, they deserve, given that they've spent 2 or more years developing these plans. But that has created a, you know, the implication of that has been that there are some bottlenecks in our resource that we didn't expect. You know, we knew it would be a heavy lift, but certain areas of specialists, particularly things like geomorphologists, economists, commercial colleagues, we didn't have enough in place, and potentially don't have access to enough resource internally to be able to do it as quickly as we would like. So we're figuring out how we can manage that going forward, including by getting more resource in to help us go a bit quicker. But obviously we need to just make sure that we're being fair and assessing all projects consistently. So we're looking at how we can do that. Optimizing PDP spending is another element. So as I said, baselining is really important. That allows us to pay differently from other schemes. So we can pay for results, but we need that baseline to understand where projects are moving from and where they're planning to move to. And, you know, we didn't realize how important that baselining was initially, or how difficult it would be and costly potentially. So that's something we need to make sure is clear in the future rounds. Excuse me. We also just need to make sure that funding is being used appropriately. So we've had some anecdotal feedback that, you know, some consultants have been charging extortionate fees, and that's something we need to make sure we can mitigate against. But as I said, that's purely anecdotal, and we need to kind of reflect on the 2 rounds once we've got more projects into implementation. Guidance, as I've mentioned, there's a PDP handbook that was essentially designed on the hoof for rounds 1 and 2, and so we couldn't really get it out in advance of round 2 because it was still in the midst of development, to be honest. For round 3 and beyond, we will be able to publish that, and there are other elements of guidance that will be helpful for projects to see before they apply. And then private finance, finally, is an element I was asked to touch upon. So I think it's fair to say project success in attracting private finance has been pretty varied. We're seeing, you know, between sort of 5 to 30% of project costs being from private sources at the moment. But again, it's probably too early to take a to take a call on what's a suitable level. We tried to not be prescriptive by requiring a minimum percentage in landscape recovery as well, and that's something we still stand by currently. But you know, it's not impossible. That could change in future. But the reason we kept it flexible is because we recognise in some areas it's more difficult to access that private finance than in other areas, and that's, you know, that does seem to be the case based on the projects that come in to date. So In terms of the sources of that private finance, most projects seem to be looking at biodiversity net gain, biodiversity credits, carbon. So a few sources of carbon, things like the Woodland Carbon Code and Peatland Carbon Code. Wilder Carbon as well has come up. And we expect more kind of proposals on carbon with future projects coming through. Water quality is another element that's been in quite a few projects, and this is often working with water companies to agree kind of ways to measure water quality, which obviously can be difficult, and then also how to set payments for improvements. And then natural flood management, NFM, so tends to be more independent. So, you know, projects working with local businesses and organizations to reduce flood risks and find suitable ways to pay for nature-based solutions. And then philanthropy and donations is another thing that has cropped up in quite a few projects. But as I said, we'll probably need to, before, you know, we need to kind of get more projects through and reflect back on the pilot as a whole across the 2 rounds before we can really say confidently what the main sources and potentially the most appropriate sources of private finance were, and we'll hope to provide more guidance to projects in future. That's it from me, Julia, for now. So I'll stop sharing.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, Sam. Wow, you've gone through an awful lot in a short period of time. So yeah, really good to have that. And we've got lots of questions coming in as well, which we can come back to. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Claire Hyne from the Central Dartmoor Landscape Recovery Project to join. And Claire, I think you've got some slides to share with us as well.
Yeah, hopefully everyone can see them. Can I get a nod from you, Julia, that you can see them? Yeah.
Yes, we can see them, Claire. Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm Claire Hyne. I'm the project manager for the Central Dartmoor Landscape Recovery. So our landscape recovery is led by the Central Dartmoor Farm Cluster, who are a great bunch of people. They are 10 farms who came together mainly via the Marsh Artillery Butterfly, and they began working on projects together and realised that working together made things better. They have received FIPL funding and HLF funding over the years for smaller projects and became a formalised CIC in May 2023. They put a bid together for a round 2 LR and began the development phase in June 2024. So they've employed a team of 4 to develop the landscape recovery. So that includes me as project manager. I have 2 farms and commons coordinators, Wendy and Laurie, and Jay, who is our project support officer. And we rent office space at one of the farms in the cluster. So this is our project area. Those of you that are familiar with Dartmoor will see that that is quite a large amount of hectarage. So it's around about 22,000 hectares. It's 6 commons, 22 farms and new takes, and some bits of land owned by DWT, DPA and South West Water. So it started with the farm cluster putting together the project, and some of the farms in the cluster are tenants of the Duchy. So I went to the Duchy to say, is this okay? And the Duchy said, yeah, that's great, but can you also bring in some more of our farms and some of our commons? So it grew quite a lot. And we're a very good example of a very large project, and going back to what Sam said, the problems around surveying, and I will mention it quite a bit. So what do we have to do now? We're in the development phase. We've got 6 plans, the 6 deliverables to do. So that's a land management plan, a monitoring and evaluation plan, a site access plan, a stakeholder engagement plan, a blended finance plan, and a project governance plan. I won't go into too much details on that, but needless to say, they're big pieces of work. So we started with a piece of work in partnership with the Duchy, who's one of our key partners, to create a vision through consultation and research. So we employed a landscape architect called Toby Diggins, who is absolutely superb. And we did 25 consultation sessions with a variety of stakeholders that included statutory bodies, farmers, NGOs, commoners associations, all sorts of people. Couldn't get around everyone, but we had a pretty good representation. So we split the landscape into 3 different types rather than trying to do Dartmoor all in one. And we split it into the high moor, the enclosed uplands and valleys and foothills, because that seemed the most appropriate for the landscape that we've got. So these 25 consultations, prior to the consultations, the consultees were sent a document to read that had some information that the Met Office had put together around climate change and going into the future and how that would look on Dartmoor, and a series of questions to start people thinking about Dartmoor into the future, so that when they came to the consultation, we had a good 45 minutes to an hour or so of Q&A discussion around what a resilient landscape looks like, what is currently good on the moor, what would you like to see in the future, what do we need to make it a resilient Dartmoor going forward. And at the end of the discussion, we had some line drawings that Toby those 3 different landscapes and asked the consultees to draw on them what they would like to see. And then Toby pulled all of this together and presented draft visuals at a couple of events where we brought all the stakeholders back together and collected feedback from them. And then he created the visuals that are here on the screen and an accompanying book, which details quite a lot of the research that he did behind the scenes. And you can find both the visuals and the book on our website if you want to have a look. So alongside the vision work right at the start of our development phase, we've worked with AHDB, who's done some farm benchmarking with some of the landscape recovery participants. We work with Farm Carbon Toolkit, who've provided farm carbon audits. We've worked with the Dutch in collaboration on their Curlew project. We continue to focus on the marsh fritillary that brought everyone together. That's a really key species for us. And on the right, you'll see Wendy and Laurie out surveying. Just to mention that again, they've been doing a lot of surveying. So I thought I'd run you through very quickly, because I appreciate we're running a little late now, the process that we've gone through for the commons plans. We have to do farms plan, land management plans and new takes as well. But I thought I'd talk you through the commons ones that we're doing. So we started by revisiting the vision work that we did to start with, and spent time with the commoners and said, well, what can you see on these visions that you already have on your commons? What are you proud of? What's great? Don't be overwhelmed. We're not looking at everything on there. Can you pick out maybe a few things on there that you think suits your common or that you think could happen on there? So we looked at the enclosed uplands visions and then also the high moor, because we felt that that fitted the commons landscape well. So we weren't asking everyone to look at everything, but to pick out what was appropriate for them. So then we picked a piece of similar land, but not Dartmoor, felt that that was important to use as an example. And then highlighted different parts of the common. So for example, this bit has some degraded blanket bog. This bit's really good condition for species rich mire, millennia dominated wet heath, heavily grazed dry heath, scrub over archaeology, eroded stretch of footpath, dense gorse dominated heath, grazed acid grass and scattered trees, and dense bracken. We then discussed what those management actions could be for those particular things that have been highlighted. So you could encourage more native trees to create shade on the river and soften the plantation edge. In this section on your common, you could cut fire breaks and manage gorse rotationally. On this section, you could reduce the erosion by widening the footpath. On this section, you could reveal the archaeology by targeted scrub control and sheep grazing. On this bit, you could be looking at restoring heather and bilberry by limiting winter grazing pressure. On this bit, we could target the millennia with cattle and ponies and pop them on there. Maintain that good quality mire, which is the really important thing. We kept reassuring that where there is good, we are talking about maintaining good. That doesn't get forgotten. And then a bit of peatland restoration, if that's appropriate, and managing bracken mechanically and with livestock. So, where am I? So we also asked them to consider what they need to deliver an ambitious commons plan. And this is the feedback we were getting. Really key was financial sustainability into the future for future generations. Support of existing good management, revenue payments for peatland restoration, more monitoring and contact with advisors to help achieve habitat outcome. A lot of people felt that they had support at the start and then were left to their own devices and then come back and policed at the end. They would really benefit from ongoing dialogue. Index-linked payments, payments relating to inflation, and positive stories and better public understanding. So those bit that we asked them what they needed to deliver, we could then go back to that commons plan and say, well, okay, so maybe you need some deer control here. Maybe you need some GPS collars to help with that targeted grazing. Maybe you need some supplementary feed and mineral licks. Maybe you need some revenue payments for the restored lands. Pulling it all together. So what makes landscape recovery different? Regular contact with the team. So you've got that ongoing dialogue that I just mentioned. And habitat surveys are a very big part of it. You can also include other opportunities around trialing things, unusual bits of monitoring that you want to get done, and importantly, to celebrate success. So then after going through all of this with those commons associations, we asked them to create a working group to develop their ideas and plans and to work collaboratively with the team to create a plan. This is where we currently are, and we haven't finished this process yet because we're still in our development phase, and we're also working with farms and new takes. So we are submitting at the end of February. We're just at the point of starting to come together to find out exactly where those plans are, but that's where we're at. We still have a lot to do. We're submitting at the end of February, and we're very aware of this. However, we felt this farmer-led approach was the best way to engage with everyone and to achieve the best results. And it does take time. And the landscape recovery development phase is nowhere near long enough to develop the trust and relationships that you need to make these schemes work. So my advice to future round 3 applications. Begin with a clear consultation process and a vision. It was a privilege to be part of the vision process and to be able to hear all the honest conversations about people's thoughts and ideas for the future of Dartmoor. It helped shape the whole development phase. It was brilliant. Surveying. Don't underestimate the amount of surveying required. You have to baseline everything. If you want it to be in your project, it has to have that data to show. The farm cluster didn't realise, as Sam said, the information wasn't there when they put in the application, and we've got 22,000 hectares, and this has been challenging. So it's been a monumental job for Wendy and Laurie. There's no doubt about that. But I would highly recommend employing staff to do the job, because when Wendy and Laurie then go and speak to the land managers about their land management plans, they've walked across the land, they've looked at it in detail. They're really well informed about what's there. And I believe that the farmers and commoners really appreciate that because they've been on their land. Another thing of note around the surveying is that all of the SSSIs had recently been surveyed by Natural England, so that was great. So Wendy and Laurie didn't have to do that. However, they were surveyed using a CSM methodology, and for landscape recovery, it has to be done through a BNG methodology. So poor old Laurie has had to convert the CSM to BNG, and that's not been a small job either. So which leads me on to employ as large a project team as you possibly can. There's a lot of work to do. There's only 4 of us. There's 22,000 hectares. It's a lot. I would double our team at least. And especially when you're working for a farm cluster, we don't have the support of being part of a larger organisation. Team members are better than contracting freelancers and consultants often, if you possibly can, because it's really important to be part of the project and invested in it and really understand it. Get a GIS and data officer. Oh my goodness, we've needed one of those. Include a really decent budget for farmers' time spent on the project. We did. And everyone appreciates being paid and valued for their time. It's really important. And we've also received advance payments from Defra for our PDP, which is really crucial for the farm cluster. And it's the only way that the cluster could deliver the project. If you want to encourage farmers to lead on agri-environment schemes, you need to provide support such as those upfront advance payments, because the clusters just don't have any reserves or cash flow or backing of a larger organisation to be able to do it otherwise. Allow plenty of time and budget for historic environment. Dartmoor's full of it. It's a huge job as well. Really important, really interesting, but just make sure you allow time and budget for it. And get as much advice as you can from the round ones and twos that have been through it or are still in it. And we're all very happy to share the advice we have. Each project is bespoke, so not all the advice is relevant, but if nothing else, it's a support network that you really need once you're in it. So that's it from me.
That's absolutely great, Claire, and thank you so much for covering everything and really focusing on the extra additional requirements of Commons. So we're going to, just to try and catch up on a bit of time, I'm going to ask us to go straight over Claire. So Claire Payne, are you about? If you can turn on your video, that'd be absolutely great. So Claire's from the West Cumbria Rivers Trust and is project managing the Resilient Glenderamakin Landscape Recovery Scheme, which, as Sam said, is already going through assurance. So very exciting to have submitted in June. So over to you, Claire.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Julia. Yeah, thanks to both the talks beforehand. That was really, really informative. So yeah, as Julia said, I'm the project manager for the Resilient Glenderamakin Landscape Recovery Project. I work for West Cumbria Rivers Trust. For those of you who are not familiar, we work with landowners and farmers to deliver environmental projects across our patch. We're part of a wider network of Rivers Trusts. So, and on this project, we've been very grateful to have the support from the Rivers Trust and from Nature Finance. So yeah, just going back to Claire's comments before, we were very lucky. We do have a team of 9 people with lots of varying skill sets, which it sounds like that was a really, really good thing to do. So please bear with me, 10 minutes isn't very long to cover everything that we're working on in this project. But yeah, so as Julia said, we are round 2. We are in assurance. We submitted in June and it was a very busy few months. Don't underestimate the amount of work required for this. We are hoping to enter negotiations shortly. So just briefly what we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about, so a bit about the project, a bit about the 3 commons that we're working with. So that's Mungrisdale, Threlkeld and Matterdale. I've tried to scatter a few photos throughout the presentation just to show you where they are. So that one in there is Threlkeld Common on the right. And also a few thoughts on the potential for landscape recovery to deliver on common land. So for those of you that don't know, the Glenderamakin flows in a 16-kilometre arc behind Blencathra, which is a very popular wainwright for those of you into your walking. It joins Naddlesbeck and St John's Beck to become the Greater into Keswick. Keswick is a community at risk. They have flooded quite badly 3 times in the last 20 years. The overall catchment is 142 square kilometres, but in the Landscape Recovery Project, we're doing 7,800 hectares. So how that's made up will take a little bit longer than 10 minutes to explain, but that's roughly the size we're working to. The catchment's really special. It's all drains into the River Derwent and Bassenthwaite Lake SAC, and the commons are designated as a High Fells SAC as well for their ecology. We are in the Lake District National Park, and we're also a World Heritage Site designated for the cultural heritage, and we also have Thirlmere Reservoir in there, which is a strategic water supply for the northwest. The main farming is the main land use, which is basically beef and sheep in this particular area. So just in terms of an introduction to the Landscape Recovery Project, we submitted our plans for £134 million as a base case. We're working with 43 land managers and 3 commons, so there is a lot of interest within this area, so we're very happy about that. We asked the farmers and land managers to sign up to what we're calling a memorandum of understanding, where we put an individual land management plan together. They sign that to show Defra that they have a level of commitment to the project. Whilst it isn't legally binding, I think it really helped to frame those conversations and helped us build the plans together. So yeah, we mentioned that we're in the assurance phase, so we're really, really hoping for a positive outcome from that. I mentioned there about blended finance, so we have done a lot of engagement for private finance. It has been quite a journey. We're still on that journey now, and it seems to be that everybody's waiting for everyone else to put their hand up and to donate to this. So we've had some funding from Hogan Lovells for our legal support and Lloyds Banking Group, and we've also got conversations coming up with National Highways and Aviva. So fingers crossed. Our overall goals are looking at net zero, protected sites and habitats, but crucially also supporting nature-friendly farming. We're hoping through our governance model to have a CIC with a farmer representative and a commons representative on there. I'm really looking forward for that to be set up. And yeah, we've also got a flood risk model that we are working to as well. So hoping to take a little bit off that flood peak as a result of all the land management changes across the area. So I've just put together a little map just to show you where the commons are. So for those of you who don't know the area, we've got Mungrisdale Common, which is made up of 3 common land units in the north. That's just shy of 3,300 hectares, and that has 11 active graziers on there. And we've also got Threlkeld Common, which is the smallest one, which is 450 hectares with only 4 graziers. And then we've got Matterdale Common, which is just over 1,000 hectares with 7 graziers on there. They're all in schemes to varying extents, and they've all got a different level of ambition about what they want to see through landscape recovery, and we're still on that journey. We're very grateful to the Foundation for Common Land and H&H as well as Natural England to facilitate those conversations and put together some really good plans. Crucially, I think the main interest is coming from those 20-year payments, them being index linked, so they will go up on an annual basis, and they'll obviously get to work with us on the ground to help deliver that. Predominantly, we're looking at creating additional scrub exclosures, peat restoration and grazing management, which also supports those farm businesses. But given that these commons make up 50% of the project area, it's quite substantial to us to make sure that these commons actually come in fully into landscape recovery when we go through negotiation. Because as I mentioned, the MOUs that we had before, they're not actually legally binding at this stage, but there's still plenty of work that we need to do going forward. Many of these graziers also have holdings in the project area as well, so some of these farmers are actually hearing the conversation from both sides, which we think is really helpful, and that way they can feed into it to help come up with an option that works for everybody as best we can. But lots of data collection has been ongoing so far. We've got a brilliant monitoring team where we've been looking at ground truth in the MVC survey data's up there. But there's still a lot of discussions and surveys needed in spring, so we're really hoping we can move that forward in terms of some WADA surveys and really kind of refine what those plans look like. I guess the most important thing is that as a Rivers Trust, we haven't really ever had the funding to be able to work on common land. This common land, it needs to work over much longer timeframes to develop plans up there. So yeah, without working with Foundation for Common Land and H&H, I don't think we would be where we are. And if we are trying to work at the catchment scale, which is what I believe Rivers Trust should do, we need to be up on the uplands as well as down on the lowlands. So yeah, we're really lucky to be in this situation. I just put together this slide just to show a few of the benefits that I felt that commoners would get, as well as society, from going into this project. Crucially, a lot of that comes from in terms of that secure farm income over 20 years. It'd be nice, obviously, for them to not be worrying about where funding's coming from. For us, as a Rivers Trust, as all, we'd like to see increased biodiversity and climate resilience, which has an impact on the communities downstream. Any development work through this project could also be used to go into a countryside stewardship scheme should landscape recovery for one of those 3 commons turn out not to be the right opportunity. We've been able to develop this plan based on what the commoners want. The commoners have asked if the CIC could take on the maintenance of any of the capital work, so we've been working with them to look at how we might do that and what proportion of those payment rates we would need to do that over that 20 years. This presents an opportunity for local contractors to not only deliver the capital, but also to help maintain that, should that be the opportunity that we come round to. We're also looking at, obviously this is to support the cultural heritage. We've had a catchment-wide heritage impact and optioneering study done, which has really fed into all of our plans that we've had to submit, including up on the commons, and a lot more opportunities have been found from that. We're really keen to support sustainable farm businesses. They're a key backbone of this rural community. And as I've mentioned already, the collaborative partnership working that we've had together with arm's length bodies and charities like Foundation for Common Land has been really helpful to help us get up there onto the commons. And then I just briefly put this together as a bit of a final slide. That Venn diagram on the side is basically, you could have as many circles as you want in there, but it's really difficult to get that sweet spot in the middle to try and please everybody in here. So we're really hoping that we've put together a plan that does please everyone. There's still a lot more consultation to be done and consenting and development work, partly because we didn't have the implementation agreement available to us when we submitted back in June. So we're now working through that. Some of the key challenges we're looking at is also, are there enough contractors available to deliver at the scale that we need? These are very steep rural areas. Those maintenance considerations as well, is we'd obviously need to make sure that the commoners are as engaged in that side of things as well as the CIC as well. And then obviously people have talked about already that future monitoring really is extensive and these areas are vast. But we're really keen that we can get delivering this on the ground should we get through negotiation. But hopefully we will. Is that all right, Julia? Tried to keep that to time to catch up.
That's perfect, Claire. Thank you so much. And absolutely fascinating to see, and having been involved in the project and still involved in the project, it's lovely to see how you brought that all together. So now it's, I'm afraid, over to me to have a look at really sort of the governance side of things. So this might be a little bit dry, but going to try and make it as interesting as possible. So this is being recorded, so we will be sending this out, so you will be able to review this again, and so you can see the pictures again, because I'm going to go through it quite quickly. So my name's Julia Aglionby, and I'm the Executive Director of the Foundation for Common Land, and I'm also a land agent in private practice as well. So we're going to, so the first focus is really looking at how noting that landscape recovery has multiple funding sources, and this has been alluded to by Sam and by Claire and by Claire, both Claires. So it's really saying that we're looking at the landscape recovery responsible body is bringing together farmers, commoners, tenants, landowners. And so property rights are absolutely at the heart of this. If we want to have successful delivery, we have to really consider the property rights that each person involved has. And then there are schemes involved in terms of environmental land management. So those are public schemes. I've got landscape recovery and SFI. Some people will have countryside stewardship on their own farm as well. They'll have a mixture of things. We also have the private finance options, so that could be carbon credits, nutrient neutrality if you're on the catchment with nutrient neutrality, BNG, and also philanthropy. So there are various people who are contributing to contributing towards a landscape recovery. There may be companies, local communities, private individuals. So that's the first thing to think about, is that a landscape recovery project in its responsible body brings together multiple funding sources. So we've got to find a mechanism, for that, the paperwork. How is that going to work? And it varies from scheme to scheme how many people are involved. But so you've got those different. The last slide was looking at the different types of agreements you would have, and then here focusing on the individuals. So the landscape recovery responsible body that may be the CIC in a lot of cases, both in the resilient Glenderamakin, they're setting up a CIC, and Central Dartmoor already has a CIC. But it's really important that they can spend the time talking to each individual farmer. I've just put here 1, 2, and up to 50. So there could be a lot of farmers involved. And in addition, in both the Dartmoor and the resilient Glenderamakin, they have commons associations involved. And so those commons associations therefore need to have an agreement between the different commoners and the landowner. So it's a sort of stacked system of agreements. Now, I'm focusing on that bit on the right-hand side, the Commons Association, but we must remember that we are also looking at a lot of individual farmers being involved as well. So these are multi-party agreements. So in terms of how it works on the Commons, many of you will be familiar with the Commons Association, where you bring together commoners and owners. And we've already had a question in the chat about how do you incorporate non-active graziers. And really, it's a matter of risk management with this. So I've got here graziers, who are people actively grazing, former graziers, people who've maybe stopped in the last 10 to 20 years, but maybe still farming and have the potential to graze. Then you have non-graziers who may live away, they may live in London, they may live overseas, they may live several hundred miles away, or they may simply just never be going to graze, and they would be a low risk, they're not likely to graze. And then, but they could let out their rights potentially to another grazier. And then we have new graziers. And it's very important in terms of the Foundation for Common Land, we're seeking to keep the system of pastoral commoning alive. And that means having the mechanism to bring new graziers in. So Matterdale Common, which was one of the ones in Brazilian Glenderamakin, one of their concerns is that commoners are aging, and so they're very excited because just this last week they've got a new grazier who's coming on to graze. So that's and someone of the non-graziers is letting them some rights, and it's really good to have new blood, active shepherds coming in. And then in terms of the owners, there's a range of interests that the owners have. They might be just interested in the land, they might have a sporting interest, there might be a water company, they might be a Ministry of Defence, they might be Natural England, lots of different interests, and how that balance of power works. So the question arises, how do we bring everybody together? How do we have these multiple interests, the multiple agreements? How do we have the multiple interests? And then you have to have something that meets Defra's requirements. If we're just talking about that landscape agreement with landscape recovery agreement with Defra, that implementation agreement, it's got to be solid. You're talking about 20 years plus, maybe up to 30 years. Really important that the paperwork will be able to deal with lots of changes. There'll be people who die, there'll be people who get divorced, and there'll be people who move during that period. You will also have people who don't comply with what they've signed up to. That you can pretty much guarantee. So what's important is that these agreements make sure that the rights and responsibilities are held. Everybody likes to receive the money. The question is, are they delivering what they say they're going to deliver? So we say that there are sort of three layers of these agreements. The first agreement on a common is what we call the internal agreement. So that's between the association officers and every beneficiary. So all the owners and all the commoners on that particular common. So if you've got 3 commons, as in Resilient Glenderamakin, you'd have 3 different internal agreements. Those are signed as a deed and need to be drafted by a lawyer. Whatever you must do, nobody must ever receive money for drafting one of these internal agreements as a deed unless they are a lawyer. It is against the law. The next sort of layer of the agreement, once that's signed up, then the association can sign a contract with a special purpose vehicle. A special purpose vehicle is just a sort of acronym for what the landscape recovery responsible body is. So often that's a CIC. It could be a limited company or a limited liability partnership, but I mean, Sam might be able to tell us, but a lot of them are CICs. So that's the contract between the association and the SPV, the CIC. Now, those would also then have those contracts with all of the other farmers 1 to 50. So there'll be lots of these contracts. And then once those are signed up and the CIC is confident they've got everybody signed up and ready to proceed, then they can sign the implementation agreement with Defra. It's always very unwise to sign up to an agreement with, say, Defra if you haven't got other people tied in. You need to make sure you've got everybody tied in. So that's why I've got the internal agreement at the top, then the contract with the SPV, and then the implementation agreement. So the question is, how do you get there? Because that's very easy just to say it, but this is a very, very complex process. We're getting a lot of people involved. In the Forest of Dartmoor, for instance, there are over 300 signatories to their current high-level stewardship, maybe 80 active graziers. So the question is, how do you make this process work? I would suggest you need to allow between 2 to 4 years in order to go from your pre-development phase, where you're getting people interested, through to the actual implementation. And I know that sounds like an awfully long time, but that's the reality of, I mean, I know a lot of work was done by West Cumbria Rivers Trust in advance. They had a NERV project. Those commons were already G'd up because they were already in schemes. So I've divided this into 3 phases, so what I call the pre-development phase. And during this stage, the Foundation for Common Land and H&H and the Resilient Glenderamakin worked really closely with all the active commoners because Defra would like to see an expression of interest signed by each of the different land managers. But what's important is that the association officers cannot sign up to this until they have actually got some agreement with the active commoners. It's not legally binding, but it's really important to do that consultation. People don't like being sort of shoehorned into something, and they don't like someone else signing up on their behalf. So we put together information documents, and those were circulated and sent out to all the commoners. It was raised at commoners meetings, and then when it was clear that people were interested, and then the expression of interest was signed, that could then be submitted to Defra, and having that gave Defra confidence, and was probably one of the reasons why these 2 landscape recovery agreements have been got development phase funding. During the development phase, there's a lot of work that is undertaken with the Commons associations. There's the visioning work, as Dartmoor has said. There's a lot of one-to-one meetings and group meetings that happened in Resilient Glenderamakin. And before implementation, we went through 2 stages. So every single commoner signed a memorandum of agreement, and with that, they authorised the association to then sign a memorandum of understanding. So to make sure that it wasn't legally binding, these aren't legally binding, but they are saying, all other things being equal, I plan to sign up to this. I understand what's being asked, and I plan to sign up. So that was done during the development phase, and we've drafted, documents, those memorandum of agreement and memorandums of understanding. And then once that's done, and you've gone through you're going through the assurance phase and the negotiation phase. At this stage, we're looking to sign up a 20-year internal agreement as a deed between the Commons Association members and the owners. And Clair, Payne and I were only just this week, we've been discussing what's the time frame for doing that. This is a process that land agents and lawyers who are involved with Commons are familiar with from ESA schemes, HLS schemes, CS schemes. But it is a 20-year agreement, and there are a lot of more capital works involved. So very important that that is thought through carefully. And then the contract between the association and the landscape recovery responsible body needs to be negotiated, and that includes the things like who's going to do the capital works, who's going to maintain the capital works, as well as the rights and responsibilities, the payments for the annual management payments, and the stocking levels, and how with the fencing as well. So that's 3 phases: pre-development phase of preparation, during the development phase, and then pre-implementation phase. So do be prepared for that. None of this is rocket science, but it does take time and patience and requires experienced facilitators. And we've got quite a lot of resources available in the Foundation for Common Land to help you with that. We're also running a course starting in January on collaborative practices for landscape scale management, and that's going to be run through the University of Cumbria. So if anyone's interested in that, we're going to be running a course there. What I should say is that I've just given you a snapshot a bit about governance, but other key issues that you need to consider during your development phase are making sure you've got a live register, you've got really good links with the commoners and the owners, if you're going to do works on the common, you need Section 38 consent and environmental impact assessment screening. You need the consents for the SSSI, archaeology and heritage. That could be a World Heritage Site, other around the scheduled ancient monuments. Who's going to manage the capital works and deliver them? How are the funds going to be distributed? How are the stocking calendars going to be set up, and how will those stocking be split between the different commoners? And then consider, in terms of the mechanics, the transition from HLS or old CS agreements. So there's a lot to think about. Huge admiration for both Clairs in terms of trying to hold all this work together. And we'll be absolutely delighted at the Foundation for Common Land to try and support people if they're going through these phases and providing resources. We have a Common Land toolkit and we have other resources available. So do please get in touch. And that is all from me. So I think now we're handing over to Megan, aren't we? Megan.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Megan. That's
Can you
great.
see?
We can see the slides, yes.
Fabulous. Right. For those who don't know me, my name is Megan Locke. I work for the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. I'm a senior farm environment advisor. I've been in post for several years now, and one of my main roles, or the main part of my role, is I am the facilitator for the Martin Down and the Allenford Farmer Cluster. So now I've got to try and get this to work. So just to put it into context, the Martin Down Farmer Supercluster is 3 clusters together, and they are based just on the edge of Salisbury to Cranbourne and covers the Broad Chalk area. So altogether we cover about 3/4 the size of the Isle of Wight. The one in particular that I'm going to be talking to you this evening is the Martin Down Farmer Cluster. So that's one of the 3 of the supercluster. As you can see, the other 2, the Allenford in particular, the other one that I am the facilitator for, was one of the first pioneering farmer clusters in the country. So this came into existence after the Marlborough Downs Nature Improvement Area came and finished. This was one of the first of the 5 farmer clusters to form in the country in 2013. And then following that, they decided 2 other farmer clusters formed to halo this area here, the Martin Down National Nature Reserve. For those who don't know that area, it's one of the only pristine areas of chalk downland in the country. It's 350 hectares, and it's kind of a mecca for species. If you want to go and see turtle doves or grey partridges, barn owls, corn buntings, numerous butterfly species, this is where you go. So farmers came together, they wanted to see this area thrive, but they wanted those species to be able to have to move out from the NNR and into the farmland, so to farm with nature. So I'm the national lead for farmer clusters within GWCT, so I get asked quite a lot, how do you set up a farmer cluster, and how would you set your priorities? And I always say, what is it that you want to see on your farm that you don't see anymore, or would like to see to move on to your land? But that's also kind of, you've got to juggle that with how you're going to fund a farmer cluster. What are your priorities in the area? Is there existing data? Is there a SSSI? What species are declining? Soil health, connecting habitats. So there's a number of things that you need to consider. But how we did it was, sorry, it's jumping around. Our priorities were, we set 3 priorities: creating, connecting habitats, extending chalk downland, and soil health. But the main focus was the species, so turtle doves, corn bunting, lapwing, grey partridge, and as you can see, there's quite a few others on that list there. But the two farmer clusters that I'm the facilitator for decided that they didn't want to go through countryside stewardship facilitation funding. They felt that that was too onerous, too prescriptive, and it would be too constraining. And really what they were very focused on is data. So they wanted to pay for it themselves. So they contribute £2 per hectare annually themselves. Martin Down Farmer Cluster is 5,500 hectares, and the other, Allenford, is 7,500 hectares. Alongside that, GWCT has a charitable trust donor that funds my work, particularly just solely on Martin Down Farmer Cluster, who gives me a sum of money every year to enable me to do those surveys and monitoring. And GWCT pays my salary and the work that I do there. But I also look for grants elsewhere, and I've just had a FIPL application approved, just shy of £100,000, which I've got to turn around and get delivered by the end of February. So, as I said, before you really start any conservation works, you really need to know what you've got on the ground already and what you're working with. And this is why we set out to survey and catalogue the wildlife on every member's farm since 2013 and 2017 for Martin Down Farmer Cluster, undertaking a baseline survey and then continually monitoring that ever since. You can see down here, this is the cluster, and we put the 1 km squares across the cluster. Within those there are transect lines, which are then walked for multiple species annually or biannually. This can be butterflies, bumblebees, corn buntings. Grey partridge counts are done over a whole farm. Turtle dove censuses are done every year. We do breeding bird surveys, barn owl nest box monitoring, ringing and radio tracking. So then we can see what habitats they're using and how we connect those across farm boundaries. And the list goes on. But as I said, baseline survey is vitally important because we need to know how we're improving it and what maybe we need to do more of. And all of this information is then uploaded onto a platform called Living Record. So that data is then available to local biodiversity record centres. But some of these surveys are scheduled, monitored every year or every other year or every 2 to 3 years. But 95% of the survey work is done by myself. And as one of the other speakers said earlier, it's a lot of work, especially if you're covering 13,500 hectares. Don't underestimate how much work that takes. And if you have bad weather systems like we've had recently, that just knocks weeks out sometimes. So it's very difficult, and you do need support. And if you can get that, then that's wonderful. So what have we achieved so far? We've created over 100 hectares of new habitats since 2017, which include grass buffer strips, species-rich flower margins, beetle banks, turtle dove plots, arable reversion, taking land out of cultivating arable strips, wild bird seed plots, and putting in butterfly banks and connecting those across farm boundaries. So talking to the farmers in groups, using land up to map, stewardship schemes, looking where the opportunities are and where we can connect better. We've also had countless training days, of which I do or either do myself or get other experts in to come and do that. We've created 7 new lime ponds. Turtle doves need water to feed their chicks. They need to be able to produce crop milk. So water on a chalk landscape is quite rare, a bit scarce. So we've decided to put in 7 new lime ponds, but also 21 puddles. Through doing bird surveys, noticed swifts are scarce. So we've put 15. Every farm's got a swift box and coolers. Feeding beetle banks, 6 kilometres hedgerows. We regularly monitor our beetle banks for harvest mice, and we've got them breeding on every farm. We've got rare arable plants. That one there, the red one, is a pheasant eye, so that's a nationally scarce endangered species. and now we've got that growing in quite large numbers. We created, did a project called Creating Space for Species, needed planning permission to create butterfly banks. We've got our own bespoke app, so each farmer can record species that they see on their farm, and I can then extract the data. We're also part of an Improving Fallow Plots for Breeding Lapwing project, which is being run by GWCT but funded by Natural England. So just to kind of give some data, so once widespread, the grey partridge is now a red listed species of concern in the UK due to steep population declines, which have been linked to agricultural intensification. So they're relatively short-lived, they don't move around very much. They are strategist species and they're susceptible to predation. And as they're a ground nesting bird, they are greatly affected by bad weather, for example, chick survival. So the graphs here show an average pair density of 5.5 hectare over across 5.5 hectares rather than exact numbers on each farm. So this is citizen science. Farmers drive around the field in a particular way and count the anti-clockwise and then count the grey partridges at dawn or dusk. Even though you can see here that we have quite an increase on spring pairs, the better measure of partridge population is autumn numbers, because in reality chicks are lost to severe weather and predation, which this sadly mirrors the national trends. But we can see here that the numbers are relatively sustainable and they're increasing, and we're looking at long-term data. So when this year's data comes in, we can have a look where we're going next. But I think we're going to have, we've had quite a good year this year. Barn owls are monitored. So since 2018, the number of owl boxes have increased from 10 to 34. And an initiative led by GWCT which was self-funded by some of the individual farmers, has enabled us to monitor those boxes, and we can say that 30% of those boxes are now regularly occupied. So an average success is over this time is of about 78% of fledging. Corn buntings have increased over 120%. They're also a red listed species. They are a barometer, like the grey partridge are, of health in the countryside. And as you can see here, that they've increased. At 2020, COVID hit, the ability to be able to survey continuously, because it's quite intensive, I've dropped off, but we've now gained some volunteers who are going to help me. And butterflies are one of our priority species as well within the cluster. And we're really pleased that we can say that over the time, 58% increase in total numbers and a 28% increase in species diversity, which is fantastic. And the main thing to do really to highlight that is all of this needs to be communicated back to the farmers, because positive feedback encourages more work. And it's just great to do an annual report, get that data analysis done, and to motivate all of us to continue and do more. But it's also a community involving farmers. The most important driver of our farmer class is that the farmers are leading this. They are in the driving seat. I am literally the gears, as the lead farmer always tells me. I'm getting everything done and keeping things going, but this is their farmer cluster, and because of their involvement, then it's theirs and they feel that they own it, so they want to do more and more. So we have lots of training. This is where the young commoners came out to see us. Sorry, it keeps jumping around. I think it might have a timer on it. But also get the children out as well from the farms to come and see the barn owls being ringed, and getting the farmers to help do their own monitoring is really important as well. So this is the catchment that I work within. As you can see, in the Avon Valley, there isn't very much white space now. Farmer clusters are moving out all over the place, and over 70,000 hectares is now covered by the farmer cluster. And the reason that it works is because the farmers are in the driving seat. These clusters are more likely to deliver more ambitious work if they have active stake, they're well supported and they're funded. You can't farm in the green if you're in the red. And farmers understand the need to engage with public and the communities, and there is a confidence growing in this. And knowledge is power. If you don't survey it, you don't know what you've got, and you need to feed that back. Data is key. Thank you very much.
That's amazing, Megan. Thank you for what a wonderful run through you've done for us there, and it's lovely to see, having been involved for years, you've shown what's possible in terms of going forward, and hopefully we can get lots of farmers involved in these new landscape recovery schemes in terms of citizen science as well. So really pleased to hear that. Although we are running quite late, Lindsay, are we going to try and bring everybody on in terms of just answering a few questions? And we appreciate some people may need to leave, but there are some really good questions here. So Lindsay, are you going to sort of take us forward with?
Yes, if everyone can put their videos on, then we can see everyone. We've got some fantastic questions in the chat, and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can. If we don't get round to the questions, I will use them. We will share them with people, get the answers, and it'll give me hours and hours of social media content. So first question, a really popular question in the chat is, are there common baseline elements across all landscape recovery projects? For example, is the same habitat mapping protocol and habitat quality assessment used across all projects? I don't know if Sam can or
I can make a start, but others are probably better, more expert on this matter than I am. Essentially, we have mandatory sort of indicators, so that each project is required to baseline. There's also recommended ones, and then there are kind of bespoke ones that they can choose themselves. In terms of the way we expect it to be baselined, I think we require habitats to be sort of measured in line with the UK HAB requirements, which is what they use for biodiversity net gain, and I think was designed by Natural England. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the extent of my knowledge on baseline. So I don't know if others would like to add to that or correct me on off the back of the work they've done.
Violence. We'll get some more information.
I can jump in, but this is not
Okay.
my area of expertise at all. This is where I need my Wendy or my Laurie here to help me out. But it's the methodology for surveying, because it's predominantly habitats for those for the reporting database that Defra looks at and looking for value for money, is using the BNG methodology, and that everyone has to do that so that it's standard across all of the projects, so they can be measured against each other, which causes a certain amount of problem if you've already done some surveying that's not in BNG, which means you then have to convert it over. So it's good to be mindful of, if it is something you're thinking of doing is coming into landscape recovery, is understanding what the methodology is that you need to have that data in. Otherwise you have to redo it or try and convert it, and that's where we came a little bit unstuck with the SSSIs, having to convert it from CSM to BNG. And now I'm talking in acronyms that I don't fully understand, and I'm getting out of my expertise level, but that's what my guys tell me.
Excellent, thank you, Claire. So another very popular question is, do the panel think that the scheme will be available in the future with the current hiatus in support? So that's a question that a lot of people want to know. Sam, you probably...
Yeah, I'm happy to come in on that. I mean, I personally hope so. I've spent a lot of my life on it. I mean, it's, obviously there are fiscal challenges at the moment, and budget is tight, but we need to deliver these targets as Defra that we've got, and there are only certain ways in which we can do that, and landscape recovery is one of those ways that we hope will deliver on the targets. And again, it comes back to that baselining and monitoring. We can really you know, measure whether these projects are delivering and how much they are delivering. And I hope that that will, you know, make this scheme stand out, as well as the scale and hopefully the effectiveness of it. So I think, you know, I do really think the scheme will hold water over time. I think the proof will be in the pudding to an extent, and we need to get projects into implementation and, you know, start, you know, proving that they work. And we're trying our best to do that on our front. But as I said, it is challenging, and budget is going to be challenging over the next few years, and across the department and across government. That is just the way it is, unfortunately. But I would hope that you know, that this scheme should stand well into the future. And I think there seems to be a lot of appetite out there as well. So we just need, you know, people to stand up for the scheme, the elements that they do like, even if they don't like everything about it. And we are trying to improve it on our side as best we can. But you know, it's a learning process for us as well as everyone else.
Another question that I think is quite useful here is, landscape recovery is a real opportunity to design holistic agreements that combine farm business needs and nature recovery. So, for example, coordinated wintering strategies or linking the valley bottom to fell management. How have farmers thought through the practical examples of how these links might work? And then we've got some other questions in the chat linked to that, which are about, are these projects going to be just income foregone and capital works, or is there going to be income for farmers from these schemes? So I don't know if Claire and Claire, you've got any examples from your projects.
Shall I make a start? There's quite a lot of questions in there.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. We are hoping to pay farmers with uplifted payments for some of the things that were our, what's the phrase, on our list of things that we really wanted to do. So things around NFM. So where a farmer wants to restore a river, we're looking at topping up CS by 30%. We're hoping Defra will accept that, because traditionally that's the type of thing where a farmer hasn't had the funding to do that in the long term. Whereas some of the other stuff we found, things like hedges, farmers like them. You know, they're not particularly controversial, so we wouldn't necessarily look to uplift those. So I guess we were trying to design our payment schemes around, yeah, the public goods that we needed as well, supporting those farmers with 20-year payments. And we've also added in CS options as well at cost for other options. So it was a bit of a mixture of things.
Okay. Claire, did you want to add anything, other Claire, into that one?
No, I don't think so. Just, yeah, looking for it at the end of the day, it's public money for public goods. So you've got to show what you're doing, but also it's that landscape scale and connectivity. So you're paying people more for ambitious plans that deliver more across larger areas.
We've got another question, and this is to do with the scheme sort of rules and structure. So is there any clarity on the proposed break clause provision and basis of revenue payment review?
I can try to answer that one. I mean, clarity, we've published well, not published, we've sent the project implementation agreement terms and conditions out to the projects that are in the scheme at the moment a few weeks ago. You know, we have had a bit of a delay on that front, and you know, we apologize to projects. We know that's made planning difficult, but I think we're at a point now where, you know, making any more changes to those terms and conditions is, you know, first of all, we're going beyond where we're comfortable on the government front, and secondly, uncertainty over those heads of terms is just not helpful for any of the projects. So we've sort of set out where our stand is. It does involve a a very unhelpfully named clause called the termination for convenience clause, but that, you know, it's just a standard clause that's in a lot of agreements. It's in countryside stewardship agreements, old HLS agreements. There is an equivalent clause that essentially government need to be in there so we can account for changes in legislation, you know, extreme circumstances that might occur in future that mean that government might need to get out of agreements. They are very rarely used in practice. So I think it's not, you know, it's not necessarily just a government gets out and whenever they want kind of thing. And obviously there are also elements of that clause that have been updated and hopefully are more reassuring for projects that have seen those. So there is a separate thing, which is the review points, and those are mandatory for every project. Their project reviews are at year 2, 5, 10, 15, and then beyond if you've got a longer than 20-year agreement. That's where we look at, you know, payments and private finance and, you know, potentially adding land, any changes in the project, whether the project's delivering as we expected and the forecasts are right, or whether they need modifying because the habitat's changing in a different way than we expected, or whatever they may be. So there are review points, you know, they're a different element. There is also annual reviews as well, which have a narrower scope than those project reviews. So it's two separate things. And yeah, that's, I mean, I don't know if others have any thoughts on the any of the elements in that question.
I mean, I could perhaps chip in here that it's better than CS, where this early termination is 6 months rather than 1 year. So, you know, this is the reality of where we are. I think with the number of, you know, within a 20-year period, you could see quite a lot of changes in government. So it's understandable that people are signing up to this are nervous. At the moment, people are being pragmatic, I think, and thinking, well, this is probably the best, you know, scheme that's on the table. I don't think it's satisfactory, you know, as an and it's something perhaps the government can think through, because we want to get lots of people coming in and really committing. And if you're doing all the capital works and a lot of work up front, and then you're not seeing the scheme run for the duration, it would be fantastic to have further commitment. Sam, I appreciate that's completely outside your gift, so this isn't anything personal, but I just think as a policy matter, it would be superb if they were that, you know, we under HLS we had 5-year break clauses. And that was a sort of, I think was fairer. So if people weren't complying, it was easier for Natural England or Defra or RPA to end. But I think the annual thing is people just feel a little bit vulnerable if there's going to be a change in government, particularly when we're no longer in the European Union. Just thinking on that money side, Lindsay, there's a interesting question about landlord tenant and how the monies are split there. I don't know whether are you okay if we take that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the question here was, we'll probably only do one more question after this because people need to leave and we've already overrun. But what is the landlord tenant split for any payments? This needs to be standard across landscape recovery schemes. That's the question. My view was it varies in context. So I would say it doesn't need to be standardized because it is very context specific. So your contract between a landlord and a tenant is different because it depends on your nature of your tenancy agreement. That said, you know, it really needs to look at what is the contribution of the parties towards that agreement. As a land agent, I'm also a land agent in private practice, and I've done some of these negotiations. I think there are maybe opportunities where, you know, people could go to if they're not getting a reasonable response there, perhaps a panel where that could be considered. I think people, you can potentially go to arbitration of your rent as well. So most tenancy agreements will have arbitration clauses in relation to them. lot of the tenants I know are doing these tenancy negotiations up front before they sign. So that's a good way of managing it. And then they would look for the 20 years, what proportion of their rent what proportion of the landscape recovery scheme income they would be paying in their rent. So it also varies on the interests of the landlords. I think it's really hard to have it standardized, but I completely understand where potentially the question is coming from, is that we don't want people to be taking advantage of in these discussions. But yes, complex area and something that I think we will learn more about as we go along.
I think we're coming probably to the end, and we've been talking for a long time now. I just wondered if any of the panelists have got something that they would like to conclude with before we finish. No? Megan, I'd love you to end our panel discussion with the answer to how are farm clusters or landscape recovery schemes like a marriage?
Well, there's the flourish in the mid at the beginning, isn't there? The excitement, and you're wanting to do so much together and get lots achieved, and you're planning your future together. But then, like mine has started in 2013, we're over 10 years old. So we've had the 7-year itch, and now it's thinking, well, where do we go now? We've got quite used to each other. We've done a lot, but do we want to continue? And I think we had that discussion and we've decided we do, and we're going to continue, and we've reinvigorated the relationship by getting some FIBL funding, and also a thing to kind of think to think that don't compare yourself to other clusters or landscape recovery projects, because you're all very different and you're all in different areas of the country and you've all got different priorities. So you're all doing really great things, but just focus on what you're doing, because it's the curse of comparing.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Now we have got a short poll, so if you wouldn't mind, we've got a question we'd like to ask all of you who've joined today. We are absolutely thrilled. We had over 300 people sign up to this webinar, so there is really demand for information and knowledge. I'm going to share the poll, and we'd like to know what you'd like from FCL, what you'd like us to deliver. And our final slide will show you what we've got coming up. So our next webinar is going to be on a collaborative practice on common land. So I'm really thrilled to hear from Sam that they're looking for schemes that are being collaboratively designed and developed. And we'd like to be able to help you with that. But as a charity, our interest is in delivering, helping you to deliver the best on common land. But we need to know what you want from us. So hopefully this poll will go live. Excellent. So if you'd like to answer the poll for us, that would be fantastic. Can everyone see that? Excellent. We are really excited. We've been working with the University of Cumbria to develop a number of short courses. Some of these have already been delivered in the Lake District and on Dartmoor. And we've got some new courses starting in January, and we have 12 bursary places available for the Upland Farming for Net Zero course. So we'll be sharing that on MailChimp in the next few days. We've also got a collaborative practices in land management course. These are fantastic courses, a mixture of online and some face-to-face sessions. The other thing that FCL is able to offer are masterclasses and bespoke training. So if there are things that your landscape recovery scheme needs help with and related to common land, we can provide those courses for you, help you to move towards your scheme, trying to reach your objectives. And we've got some really fantastic webinars coming up in January, February, March, where we're going to be focusing on vegetation management. So looking at bracken and gorse management, looking at the Millennia trials, particularly the trials that are happening on Dartmoor at the moment, and also looking at data. So we've heard today about how important data is for these landscape recovery projects. We'll be looking at the digital apps out there that can help you, as well as how data can be used for really practical things. We've got a fantastic project in the North York Moors that's looking at sheep tracking and habitat management. So we'll be able to share those with you as well. So we've got the results of our poll, which is fantastic. So webinars, that's brilliant. So we've got lots coming up, lots of ideas. If you'd like to, if you've got something specific you'd like us to run a webinar on, send us an email, let us know. And face-to-face meetings are really popular. So my favourite thing about FCL is when we meet up. So gatherings of commoners and those interested in common land are always my favourite part of FCL. So it's nice to see that. And very exciting, we've got some plans in place to develop some networks for Commons officers and for professionals working on common land. So that's good to see. That's really popular as well. Brilliant. So we'll be in touch with details of all of those things, and we'll hopefully see you next time on our next webinar.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to all our panelists as well.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.